Welcome. We'll start with the next chapter on history, that is socialism in Europe and Russia. Now let's start with the kind of fundamentals about this idea, why it started, what were the major aspects that took place, and then we'll have a comparative understanding between the French Revolution and the socialism or the communism in Russia. So let's first talk about what we have read in the last class in French Revolution. So in French Revolution, the major family there was the Bourbon family. Similar to that French family, in Russia you had another family, and that was the Romanovs. Now these Romanovs basically had the Tsar, and Tsar Nicholas was one of the major leaders or major autocrats or monarchs during that time. Now there were two main developments that took place in the Russian Revolution. One was the event of 1905, which was also known as the Bloody Revolution. The next was the 1917 events, and 1917 witnessed two events in Russia. The first was the February Revolution, the other was the October Revolution. Now keep in mind, in Russian Revolution, basically you had the February Revolution and the October Revolution. However, in French Revolution you had the July Revolution. So this July Revolution was against the Bourbon family monarch, who was Charles X, and this was against the Tsar Nicholas and his wife Tsarina Alexandria. And this Alexandria had her ancestors from German. So a kind of lot of anti-German sentiments were there in Russia. Now we will talk about that as we move forward. Coming on to why this kind of revolution started in Russia. So there were few major reasons that led to the development of this in Russia. Now let's talk about those. During 1854 and 1856, there was a period that witnessed Crimean Wars. Now these wars were mainly due to the shortage of food. Now since this region witnessed shortage of food, the people were not basically living in high destitute conditions, and there was kind of food shortages which ultimately led to rise in price. So price rise, food shortage, those were some of the major aspects. Then you had the French Revolution that brought in the wave of socialism in Russia. Again, important development during that time was during 1861, Russia was totally under the practice of serfdom. Now what was serfdom? Serfdom is a kind of feudalistic practice where the landless peasants are supposed to work or serve the people who have the land or own the land. So basically it was a kind of exploitation of the landless peasants. Again, during this time from 1890 to 1910, the population specifically in two metros during that time, that was St. Petersburg and Moscow, nearly doubled. Now if in a certain period of 20 years merely the population is doubling, it would definitely create the problems of overcrowding and destitute living conditions. So the living conditions became very worse in these areas. So these were some of the basic aspects that led to a kind of wave that promoted anti-Tsar sentiments. So Tsar was the monarch, autocrat during that time from the Romanov family, as we said, and there was kind of anti-Tsar movements that took place during that time. Again, during 1905, the period witnessed Bloody Revolution. This Bloody Revolution was the attempt by the Tsar, and this Tsar was killing the troops, or his troops basically were killing the common man or the people. So that was a kind of very autocratic move during that time that was being witnessed by the people, and people slowly and gradually started resenting it. So during this time in 1900s, you had the formation of the Russian Social Democratic Workers' Party, which was basically in 1898, and later on till 1914 this party remained illegal and worked illegally, and later on it was recognized. So till this time you had the Bloody Revolution. Finally in 1917 the Tsar was abdicated and you had two revolutions that were within few months. So first was the period of February where the Tsar was losing its power and the Romanov family basically came to an end with the Tsar being abdicated. Then in the month of October you had the Bolshevik revolution that came into power. This Bolshevik revolution was led by Lenin. Now how Lenin's philosophy was different. Now Lenin was a leader of Bolshevik party and his philosophy was different from Menshevik party. Menshevik parties was popular in Germany and these Mensheviks basically believed that the system should be open to all and everyone should have a say. However, the Bolsheviks believed or discriminated basically the rich and the poor, and they specifically believed that those who are highly disciplined and can work as per the rules should be part of the party. So that was the basic difference between the philosophy of Bolsheviks and Mensheviks. Separately, that's a kind of separate thing to understand. However, right now we are focusing on the October Revolution that took place, and October Revolution, which was also known as the Bolshevik Party movement, and during that time Bolshevik Party came into power. However, after that till 1923 Russia witnessed a period of civil war. So there was a kind of fight between the common people there, and the sole idea during this time was removing the Russian capitalist bourgeoisie system and bringing in the soldiers, the local people into power. So that was the sole idea that they were trying to move on. And finally in 1929, after the death of Lenin and you had Stalin who came to power, the idea of collectivism was started, and with this idea of collectivization, there was huge development that was witnessed in parts of Russia. Now all this we have talked about in summary. Let's understand the details of all this as we move across this chapter. Now coming on to the 18th century, as we said, the condition of Russia was very bad. It was not at all comparable to what was in Germany during that time. The situation was very poor. There was the practice of serfdom, feudalism was commonly practiced, and there were very few industries. 85% of the people thrived on agriculture during that time in Russia, which was only 40 to 50% in France and Germany during that time. So huge population was sustaining on agriculture in Russia during that time. However, French Revolution led a kind of movement which not only revolutionized the parts of France but across the globe. From India, Raja Ram Mohan Roy and Desirio, as we said, were some of the leaders who talked about it. So during that time, there were three philosophies that were commonly in practice. The first were the conservatives. Conservatives believed whatever is going on into the system is okay, but even if you want to bring a change, it should be very slow and very gradual. So that were conservatives. On the other hand were liberals. Now liberals were trying to bring tolerance for all religion. So far there was Russian Orthodox Christianity that was practiced, and they were trying to bring tolerance for all religions in Russia. However, the ideas of liberals were different from Democrats, because liberals said that only people with property should have the right to vote. However, during that time, Democrats believed that everyone should have the right to vote. So that was the basic difference between liberals and Democrats. Very important, and you must be very sure about it. So they wanted elected parliamentary government and so on. Radicals, on the other hand, wanted restructuring of everything. So they wanted vote for everyone, vote for women. They opposed kind of privileges for special sections of the society. They wanted to bring in socialism, and each person should be represented equally, and land or power should not be in the hands of few. Now during this time there was industrialization that slowly and gradually expanded. So there was new industrial regions that were coming up, railways was expanding, industrial collaborations or agglomerations were slowly coming up. So many people, children, men, women were coming to work. Now there were two kinds of factories during that time. The big factories, which were basically having working hours of around 10 to 12 hours. However, there were small workers who were working around 15 hours a day. So the idea was to fix the working hours, to improve the living condition of the people, and to give them right to vote or right to be represented or right to be heard. So those were some of the waves that started. So this brought in the wave of socialism. Ultimately, whatever is being created, every benefit is being witnessed only by a few minority. Few minority. The majority who are producing it still do not have access to it, and they are basically making the land productive. So they should have a say in it. That was the basic idea of Karl Marx, and slowly the idea of Marx was constructed, which said that there should be a kind of socialist society where property is socially controlled, and he said this should be a kind of communist society that would be done. Besides him, Louis Blanc in France talked about cooperatives, and similarly Robert Owen founded a cooperative community in United States and Indiana state, where he said this community would be known as New Harmony. So those were some of the developments which were taking across the globe. Now there was support for socialism throughout the world. As a result, one of the major organizations was formed, which was known as Second International. Now Second International had its centers across the globe. You had workers in England and Germany who were working for similar things, the working hours, the right to vote. You had Germany, which witnessed Social Democratic Party. Then you had formation of Labour Party in Britain, Socialist Party in France. So these developments across the world were part of the Second International, and similarly in France you had Paris Commune of 1871, which we had already talked about in the last chapter. So here what were the two important ideas was forming the Association of the Workers' Red Flag, that was the flag adopted by the communards or the revolutionaries, and finally the Marseillaise, which was the national song of France, or the national anthem of France, was basically becoming a symbol of commune and the struggle for liberty here as well in Russia. Now talking about the Russian Revolution, as we said, Russia did not during that time was only the present Soviet Union that we see. The parts of Finland, Estonia, Latvia, then you have Central Asian regions like Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan. All this was part of the Russian Empire during that time. We already talked about the religion, the population there. And as we said, industries were located in very small pockets, and slowly and gradually you had good transport network that was coming in. So more coal production was there, more industries, iron steel industries was coming up, and government was ensuring that the rights of the common people are getting protected. However, peasants were divided during that time, and many of them had their own religious beliefs. So the nobles who got to the power were basically working for the service of the czars and not by the local popularity. So the local popularity was only among the peasants or the worker community. So these peasants said that they would not pay the rents anymore. They started murdering the landlords, and finally this movement started in 1902 in southern Russia, and by 1905 it was covering whole of the Russia, and therefore 1905 is known as the period of bloody revolution, where people were basically against the government and Tsar was killing the troops. However, during this time, as we saw, there was wave of socialism that was coming up. But this period during 1914 also witnessed First World War. Now during First World War, what happened? There were two groups. One was the Germany-Austria, the other was the Russia-France and the Britain. Now this Russia did not had much military. It was a kind of imperialistic society during that time. However, during World War I, this Russia suffered huge losses as compared to Germany. So Germany was really strong in technology, military, and Russia was not, and the losses that Russia suffered were huge. This affected the price, this affected the shortage of fuel, shortage of food, and ultimately led to a price rise which affected the common man in Russia again. So during that time there was again a wave that said that we should move towards a kind of anti-Tsar movement that finally came in as February Revolution. So coming on to the 1905 revolution, we already said how the things worked around, and it was a kind of massacre that took place by the Tsar troops which were killing the common man. However, the support was coming from the nationalists and Zadatists. These were the people who were supporting the spread of Islam to other societies. So that was the main idea. Now during this Bloody Sunday, Father Gappen, he was very important because he led the procession to the Winter Palace, which was the main palace during that time, and many people were killed. There were strikes across the countries, universities were closed, and the demand for civil liberty and a constitutional assembly was raised. There were 4 members of the Assembly of Russian Workers that was formed in 1904. Now this was dismissed at the Putilov Iron Works, and next day many workers, more than 1 lakh workers at St. Petersburg, went to strike, saying that there must be reduction in the working hours and the working conditions should improve. Again, during this time, the Duma, which was the assembly during that time, was being dissolved off and on. So Tsar was not in a position to stabilize the situation. So the first Duma was dismissed within 75 days of its formation. Then it was re-elected, and finally third Duma came into power, which did not wanted any questioning. There was changes in the voting rights, and most of the members of the Duma were very conservative. So those were the things that worked during that time. Now, as we already talked about the First World War, the situation and the scenario, and how Russia suffered huge losses during that time, which affected the common people, the common shops and the common industries in Russia. Now coming on to the 1917 February Revolution. During the February Revolution, what happened? You had a very famous river, Neva, in Russia. So along the river Neva, there was the right bank and the left bank. Now there was clear-cut demarcation. The right bank had all the factories and the common people living in, and the left bank of the river was a basically kind of region of nobility, where you had all the fashionable street that could be seen, and huge rich paying class, and the Winter Palace was there. Now during this time, as we said, the food grains were short, the prices were high, there was very cold, huge snowfall, and all these adverse conditions further deteriorated the scenario. Now people wanted to preserve the elected body or the elected government, and they opposed the Tsar's idea to dissolve the Duma. So what were the step of events that took place? Those are very important. So first of all, there was lockout on one of the factories on right bank. This was supported by 50 other factories, or people from 50 other factories, and that day is celebrated as International Women's Day. Very important. Then the government suspended Duma. There were huge demonstrations that started from right bank but came on to the left bank, and police headquarters were ransacked. People were raising slogans. Cavalry, till now, who was supporting Tsar, started to go against the Tsar. So the cavalry was saying that they would not fire the common man here. They were also saying that there were 3 of the regiments who mutinated and joined the common man. So there were strikes all across, and there were small Soviets or communes that were found in the Petrograd. During this time, during the World War I, since there were strong anti-German movements in Russia, what happened? There was the place St. Petersburg, and they recommended that the name sounds very much German and it should be changed to Petrograd. So the name of the region changed to Petrograd, and all the unions that were formed were mainly in the name of Petrograd. So you had the Petrograd Soviet that was formed, and finally Tsar was abdicated. Now again, important thing to note here was this: Russia followed the Julian calendar, and there are 13 days difference between the Julian calendar and the Gregorian calendar or the English calendar that we basically follow. So as per the Julian calendar, we say it was the month of February, but actually as per the Gregorian calendar, due to the difference, it becomes the month of March. So take a note of this. This is important. Many of the students get confused because in many of the places you might find March as one of the entries. Now what happened after February? After February, there were huge developments. There were huge restrictions on the public meetings. Lenin was returning from the exile, and what was happening was the Bolshevik party was being renamed during this time. So all these developments were affecting the common people, and the factories or the communities were formed. Finally, there were trade unions that were formed, and the October Revolution took place. So October Revolution was one of the major ideas where Lenin said that this Bolshevik party should come into power, and what should happen during this time is it was a kind of bloodless Q-T-8, that means it was a kind of bloodless revolution against the powers or the establishment of Duma. So they basically opposed Duma, and they said that Bolsheviks should come to power. There should be nationalization of banks, nationalization of everything, the land should be divided equally among everyone. So all those were the proposals that were given under this. So uprising finally started, and all Russian Congress of Soviet in Petrograd was formed, and at that meeting majority of them approved what the Bolsheviks were doing during that time. Now what happened after the October Revolution? After the October Revolution, there was a kind of civil war that started because the old titles were banned. The people who had been partitioned, many of the people took refuge in Russia. Again, there was new uniform that was chosen for army, and the Soviet hat or the Budinovak was chosen as one of the symbols. The Bolshevik party was renamed as the Russian Communist Party. Basically the Bolsheviks conducted elections to the Constituent Assembly, but they could not gain majority in those elections. And those were some of the major developments that took place. Finally, Russia became a one-party state, and there was only the Russian Communist Party or the Bolshevik party that we could say. Now, since this was the only party, there was secret police which was known as Cheka First, OGPU or NKVD, and they punished everyone who was criticizing Bolsheviks. So what happened after this October Revolution? After this October Revolution, there was a period of civil war because the Bolsheviks bordering the areas of Russia were not favored by the people there, because they had a kind of anti-religious sentiments for some of the religions. So those things basically said that the southern part of the Russia, which was basically an influence of other nations, and some of the nations who were fearing the spread of the socialism across other countries, were promoting those regions to speak against the Bolsheviks. All this led to a kind of civil war in Russia, and finally there was lot of looting, lot of banditry and famine conditions. The winters were harsh during that time, and finally Bolsheviks, who were controlling most of the Russia, were being asked by the non-Bolshevik authorities or the non-Russian authorities, who asked them to give a kind of political autonomy or wanted a kind of control against the Bolshevik government in 1922. So Bolshevik basically discouraged this. They were against the nomadics or the nomadic people who were working there, and all this led to a huge turbulence within the society. During this time, the land that was being occupied was mainly under some Kulkas. Now, Kulkas were the people who owned a part of land, huge patches of land, and they used to buy the grains from the small landowners and keep it, speculate the price, and there was a kind of price hoarding that ultimately took place, which led to rise of price. So what happened after the death of Lenin? After the death of Lenin, Stalin, who was again a major proponent, started with the idea of collectivization. So he said there would be no kulkas anymore, and all land would be collected and kolkhoz would be formed, that is the commune farming or a common land, and whatever profit is earned would be distributed equally among everyone for each farm. So each person would get equal amount in each farm. So those were some of the developments that took place under Stalin, and the process of collectivization started. Some other things was centralization of growth. So economic growth, economic prosperity became the focus. Cheap access to medical facilities, crèche facilities in factories and working place, confiscating the land where collectivization was not taking place, and model living quarters were established. So those were some of the developments that took place during that time. Now what was the global influence. As we saw, this Russian Revolution brought changes or brought communism not only in Russia, but there was Communist Party of Great Britain and many of the regions founded Comintern, that was an international union of pro-Bolshevik socialist party who were basically supporting the ideas of Bolsheviks or Lenin. Now in Indian opinion, you had M.N. Roy, who was considered as a Mexican Communist Party, the founder of Mexican Communist Party. He was a major Comintern in the areas of India, China and Europe. Then you had the views of Jawaharlal Nehru and Rabindranath Tagore on socialism. In Hindi, you had R.S. Avasthi, who wrote about Russian Revolution, Lenin, his life, his thoughts, and the Red Revolution. Again, S.G. Vidyalankar wrote two major books, The Rebirth of Russia and The Soviet State of Russia. So in this class, we have covered the major aspect or the concept of the revolution that took place in Russia. For the detailed notes, you can definitely refer the handouts which would be available at the Examrace website. If you have any doubts, any questions, you can leave those as comment below the video. Have a very good day. Enjoy.